What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and a couple of days ago, I went through my updated post-free agency top 12 running backs. Today, same type of video, but going through my top 12 wide receivers. I don't feel like free agency had a huge shakeup on this group, but definitely a couple changes from the video I did right after the season. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and also let me know your thoughts down below. Obviously, still a lot of time before the season, so I want to know what players you guys are higher or lower on. But starting off in tier 1 with my wide receiver 1, going to be going with CeeDee Lamb. I think at this point, it's tough to not have him at number 1. He was the number 1 in points per game and total points last year in PPR scoring. He still is Dak at quarterback, so a very similar offensive situation, and he's only 24 years old, so he could honestly still be improving. You're not getting up there in age where there's risk of him falling off, so I do think he's a pretty safe while also having a high ceiling option here as the wide receiver 1. Now also in tier 1, going to go with Tyreek Hill as my wide receiver 2. He finished just behind CeeDee Lamb at 23.5 PPR points per game. Another guy who's going to be in a similar offensive situation, running it back with Tua as the quarterback. The really only main concern I'd have here with Tyreek Hill is going to be that he's 30 years old. Now, him being 30 does not mean he's going to completely fall off a cliff and be terrible next year, but there's at least some sort of risk with him slowing down. For CeeDee Lamb, there's really no risk aside from like him getting hurt or Dak getting hurt. Those things are still there for Tyreek, but maybe he just slips a little bit, and that could affect his floor and ceiling, so that's why I have him a little bit behind CeeDee Lamb. And then my final tier 1 wide receiver is going to be Jamar Chase. Definitely had a disappointing 2023. He still finished as a top 12 wide receiver in points per game, but you had the combination of the early Joe Burrow calf injury, where he was playing through it and struggling, and then Joe Burrow's season ending in week 11 really just kind of capped Jamar Chase's upside. He didn't have that elite quarterback play with Joe Burrow there. He's already showcased a 20-plus point per game ceiling in his second season. Wasn't able to build on that here in 2023, but with Joe Burrow healthy heading into 2024, I expect Chase to bounce right back up to that high-end wide receiver 1 production. I mean, his first and second seasons in the NFL, the production truly was insane, so I do think he bounces back in 2024. Now, shifting into tier 2, a couple really strong wide receivers here. At number 4, I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I was a huge fan of Amon-Ra heading into 2023, and then he goes out, had a great season, 20.7 PPR points per game, the wide receiver 4 in points per game, which is exactly where I have him right here. I feel like this Lions offense should be pretty similar. I think if anything, they might just be marginally better. A lot of young pieces on that offense. I think, they could make minor improvements, but Amon-Ra has just consistently improved in each of his seasons. As a rookie, he averaged 13.4 points per game, up to 16.7 in year 2, and then up to 20.7 here in year 3. So I think he's a very strong, like mid to high end wide receiver 1 pick. And then my other wide receiver here in tier 2 is going to be Justin Jefferson. It kind of hurts ranking Jefferson down here at wide receiver 5, but I do think the loss of Kirk Cousins is a pretty big hit. Both those dudes were very big for each other's fantasy production. He's still arguably like one of, if not the best wide receiver in the NFL, so it's not like I'm going to totally tank him. He's still going to put up production no matter who's playing quarterback for the Vikings, but I do think the ceiling and the floor do take hits here with Kirk Cousins going to the Falcons. They signed Sam Darnold, and it seems like they are going to be pretty aggressive in the market for a rookie quarterback. So it seems like the two most likely guys would be Drake May or JJ McCarthy. How are those guys going to look as rookies? Are they even going to play as rookies? I think May is probably more likely to play, but both have been talked about as dudes who may potentially sit a year. So is he playing with Sam Darnold? How's that going to look? I think tier 2 is fair just because a lot of the dudes ranked ahead of him, right? These elite wide receivers. Lamb has a guy like Dak. Chase has Burrow. Amon-Ra has Jared Goff. Tyreek Hill, I know people like to hate on Tua, but we've seen it back-to-back seasons. Tua can support Tyreek Hill, so still really like Jefferson as the player, but he is going to be my wide receiver 5. Now, pivoting into tier 3, do think we have a little bit of a fall off, but still very strong wide receiver 1s. Going to go with Puka Nacua as my wide receiver 6. He had the 3rd most PPR points all time for a rookie wide receiver. He was the wide receiver 6 in points per game. With how many stacked wide receivers we have, the fact that he was a mid-tier fantasy wide receiver 1 as a rookie with where he was picked in day 3 is crazy. And he did all of that without hitting in the touchdown department. It's not like he way overachieved by getting into the end zone. 6 touchdowns touchdowns in 17 games, so there's definitely a realistic pathway for that to go up. In fact, if he does play 17 games, I'd be surprised if he does not score more than 6 touchdowns. He was 6th in target rate, 7th in targets, 4th in receiving yards, 5th in yak. Kupp seems to be slowing down, so it seems like you have Puka on the rise. Cooper Kupp, slowing down a little bit, kind of struggled towards the end of last year. I think Puka should be this team's clear wide receiver 1 moving forward. That's why I have him here as a mid-tier wide receiver 1. We're going to have another young wide receiver after him in Garrett Wilson. I think you could probably make the argument that no one's getting a bigger quarterback upgrade than Garrett Wilson, going from like the QB carousel of Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, to now Aaron Rodgers, who should be healthy, ready to go. Garrett Wilson was the wide receiver 33 in points per game last year, so it might seem crazy bumping him up all the way to wide receiver 7. But I mean, the situation was just so bad. I already mentioned the quarterbacks. They had the fewest passing touchdowns with just 11 on the season, and they also had the 3rd fewest passing yards. So it's going to be tough for any wide receiver, no matter how talented they are, to produce in that offense. That's why I'm so high on guys like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, because they still managed to produce in a really, really terrible situation, now in a much better offensive environment. I think those Jets weapons are going to smash. And then we're going to go with A.J. Brown here as my wide receiver 8. I think A.J. Brown has settled in nicely to like this mid-tier wide receiver 1 area. He's finished between the wide receiver 6 and wide receiver 8 in points per game in 3 of the last 4 years. In his 2 seasons with the Eagles, he's averaged 17.6 and 17 PPR points per game. He's actually coming off career highs in both targets and receptions. I don't think we've necessarily seen A.J. Brown's peak season. He's had some years where he's hit really hard in the efficiency department. A year like last year, it was more so volume based. So I do think he could combine those, and he could be like, 18, 19, 20 plus point per game guy. We just haven't seen it yet. So I'd, throw some of those younger guys, Puka, Garrett Wilson. I think they may have more room to improve heading into next season, but still someone who I like here as a top 10 wide receiver. And then my final player here in tier 3, we're actually going to talk about Nico Collins, and then also kind of get into the next tier where I have Tank Dell. So I have Nico Collins as my wide receiver 9, Tank Dell as my wide receiver 10. I think at this point, there's going to be a lot of variance in how people are ranking these wide receivers. A lot of quality options from like the back end wide receiver 1s, pretty much honestly through the wide receiver 2s. I think there's going to be a lot of variance in how people are ranking those dudes. But at number 9, going to go with Nico Collins, and then Tank Dell at number 10. This entire Texans offense really just smashed expectations. CJ Stroud was about as great as you could expect a rookie quarterback to be. Nico Collins took a huge jump in year 3. Tank Dell had a fantastic rookie season. And I think it's important to look at the sample size that these wide receivers played together, because I know Nico Collins, had the better production on the season, but was he just smashing in games with no Tank Dell? How did they fare when they were both healthy and playing together? So there was an 8-game sample size where both Nico Collins and Tank Dell were healthy and on the field together. I think Tank played in 1 game where Nico Collins was hurt, and then Tank Dell left 2 different games with injury, didn't log 50% of the snaps, so I excluded those from the sample size. But in the 8 games, we had Nico Collins averaging 17.6 PPR points per game, and Tank Dell averaging 17.2 points per game. So both dudes were putting up really strong wide receiver 1 production. Both would have been mid-tier wide receiver 1s on the season if that was, over a full 17 games. The only reason I have Tank Dell lower is because he is coming off that broken fibula, but reports have been very positive. It seems like he should be ready to go easily before training camp. So I like both these wide receivers. This offense should just continue to grow with how many young pieces they have. So I like both these Texans wide receivers in my top 10. It would be absolutely crazy if you showed me these rankings heading into last year, right, where we didn't know about CJ Stroud. Nico Collins hadn't done much. Tank Dell was just a day 2 pick, right? Like, the fact that this all came together is crazy, but these dudes are both deserving here of being in this video. Now, also in tier 4, I'm going to be going with Marvin Harrison Jr., and it might seem crazy here to have a rookie. Like I said, I think a lot of players could have slotted in here towards the back end of the top 12. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is about as good of a wide receiver prospect as you're going to find. I also think you could make an argument for Malik Neighbors to be somewhere in this range also, depending on the landing spot. But we've seen like year after year that rookie wide receivers can have big fantasy seasons. Puka Nacua and Tank Dell, just talked about those guys. Both those players had big seasons in 2023. I know Tank Dell doesn't get necessarily the same recognition, but on a point per game basis, he was very close to Puka, just didn't log enough healthy games there to really get that recognition. Jamar Chase had a huge season in 2021, and then before that, Justin Jefferson in 2020. I also think an important factor here is the potential landing spots, right? Those guys who hit in previous seasons as a rookie, Puka landing with Matthew Stafford, Tank Dell landing with CJ Stroud, who played incredibly well. Jamar Chase was in a solid situation. Justin Jefferson with Kirk Cousins. Landing spot definitely does matter. And so if the landing spots were terrible like they were in 2022, you had Garrett Wilson, right, going to the Jets, Chris Olave to the Saints, Drake London to the Falcons, just no good landing spots there. I think in better situations, those guys also could have been great as rookies on a point per game basis, but the landing spots here are nice. The top 3 picks are very likely to be quarterbacks, whether the Vikings are trading up into that range or however it shakes out. If teams just stay where they are, it's very likely going to be quarterback. That leaves the Cardinals at pick 4 and the Chargers at pick 5. Both those landing spots are very, very solid. For the Cardinals, you'd be stepping in as their wide receiver 1 with Kyler Murray. For the Chargers, you'd be stepping in as their wide receiver 1 with Justin Herbert. So Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors might go back-to-back, pick 4, pick 5, 2 solid situations, and I'd be very high on both of those players. If you're a little bit, risk averse, you don't want to go with the rookie, I get it. There's a lot of other quality options. But then my final player here, my wide receiver 12, also in tier 4, is going to be Drake London. I'm probably going to be much higher on Drake London than consensus just because he's had 2 seasons, hasn't done anything crazy fantasy-wise, but I talked about Garrett Wilson having a huge quarterback upgrade. I think Drake London may have had the second biggest upgrade, going from Desmond Ridder / Taylor Heineke to Kirk Cousins. Also, you have to factor in getting rid of Arthur Smith, so it's not just a quarterback change. It's a change in the quarterback for, a huge positive. And then also a huge positive going from Arthur Smith to Zach Robinson from the Sean McVay coaching tree. He's had 2 solid seasons, nothing crazy, but I think this is where we see a huge year 3 leap here with just everything coming together on this offense. Huge believer in Drake London as a player, so I think he puts it together this season. And this Falcons offense, I think, is going to be a fun unit with Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. I think all those dudes are going to live up to expectations here. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 12. So like I said at the top, how are you feeling about these rankings? Who do you guys have higher or lower? Let me know. Also, just interested in your guys like, 9, 10, 11, 12 area. Like I said, there's a lot of wide receivers that could have slid in here. You have some younger guys, player like Rashee Rice, some veterans, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, those guys could slot in. So I just, I'm interested in what you guys are thinking. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.